They didn't just disagree with me, they looked at me with a pity that felt sharper than any insult. "You're chasing ghosts, Alina," my mentor had said, his voice echoing in the hushed, sterile halls of the university. "Plants don't feel. They respond to stimuli. They don't have joy, they don't have sorrow, and they certainly don't need a therapist. You aren't just wrong. You're becoming a laughingstock." That was the moment the world went silent. Not the peaceful silence of a garden, but the cold, crushing silence of professional exile. I was a disgraced botanist, a woman who had dared to suggest that the greenery surrounding us possessed a soul, a frequency, a way of communicating their distress and their triumphs. I was cast out, stripped of my funding, and left to wander the fringes of a science that refused to listen. The departure wasn't a dramatic exit. It was a quiet, agonizing retreat. I packed my microscopes and my recording equipment and moved to a small, neglected plot of land on the edge of a dying valley. The ridicule followed me like a shadow. My own colleagues published papers mocking my acoustic experiments, calling my attempts to play specific frequencies to plants nothing more than expensive white noise. They said I was trying to find humanity in the dirt because I couldn't find it in people. But I knew what I heard. In the vibration of a leaf, in the rhythmic pulse of a root system, there was a language. I spent years in near-total isolation. I traded my academic prestige for a life of soil and sound. I lived in a small cabin, surrounded by the very organisms the world had told me were mindless. My research became an obsession. I wasn't just recording sound. I was learning to translate the silent screams of drought-stricken crops and the quiet contentment of a flourishing forest. I developed a method, acoustic resonance therapy, to help plants overcome environmental trauma through precise sonic frequencies. It was a lonely, grueling pursuit. There were months when I thought I was truly losing my mind, whispering to ferns in the dark, trying to bridge the gap between human emotion and botanical life. Then the miracle happened. It started small. A local nursery, desperate to save a dying species of orchid, let me try my pseudoscience. Within weeks, the orchids weren't just surviving, they were thriving with a vitality I had never seen. Then, a large-scale agricultural firm, facing a catastrophic loss due to soil degradation, invited me to test my theories. I didn't just save the crops, I transformed the very ecosystem of the region. I proved that by treating the plant's stress through targeted acoustic frequencies, I could trigger a level of growth and resilience that traditional chemistry couldn't touch. I wasn't just a botanist anymore. I had become a pioneer of a new frontier, plant-based emotional therapy. I had unlocked the secrets of a world that had been shouting at us for millennia, and finally, the world was listening. Years later, I returned to the valley. I wasn't the trembling girl who had been cast out. I arrived in a vehicle that hummed with quiet power, heading toward the very estate that had once been the site of my family's greatest shame. My family, the academic dynasty that had once looked down their noses at my delusions, was gathered there. They were hosting a gala, a celebration of traditional botanical achievement. As I walked through the gates, the air felt different. The gardens were magnificent, but they were stiff, curated, and strangely lifeless, the hallmark of traditional, aggressive fertilization. I walked straight into the center of the gala. The conversation died as I approached. My father, a man whose prestige was built on the very rigidity that broke me, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Alina, what are you doing here? This is a professional event. This isn't the time for eccentric hobbies." The insult was reflexive, a ghost of the man he used to be, but I didn't flinch. "I'm not here for a hobby, father," I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of 1,000 forests. "I'm here to show you the future." I signaled to my team, who were stationed at the perimeter of the estate's grand conservatory. We activated the resonance sequence. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a deep, humming vibration that seemed to settle in the marrow of your bones. As the frequency rippled through the air, something miraculous occurred. The conservatory, once a static museum of plants, began to dance. The leaves didn't just move in the wind. They pulsed with a synchronized, rhythmic grace. The colors seemed to deepen, the greens turning into an emerald so vivid it looked like liquid light. The atmosphere changed from a sterile garden to a breathing, living cathedral of life. The guests gasped, some even catching their breath in a sudden, inexplicable surge of calm. It was as if the plants were sharing their peace with us. The silence that followed was different from the one I had left years ago. This was a silence of awe. My brother, a man who had once mocked my pretty songs, stood with his mouth agape, his eyes glistening. My mentor, who had once told me I was chasing ghosts, reached out a trembling hand to touch a leaf that seemed to vibrate with life, his face a mask of profound regret. It's real," he whispered, his voice breaking. "The intelligence. It's actually responding to us." I looked at my father. The man who had told me I was an embarrassment looked smaller than I remembered. He didn't offer a grand apology. He couldn't. Instead, he simply looked at the vibrant, thriving world I had created from nothing, and for the first time in my life, he nodded. It was a quiet acknowledgement of my truth. I realized then that my journey wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving my truth right. The pain of the past had been the soil, and my resilience was the seed. I had taken their dismissal and turned it into a symphony. As I walked out of the estate, leaving the stunned crowd and the pulsating gardens behind, I felt a profound sense of peace. I knew that the world would never look at a leaf the same way again. I had taught humanity how to listen to the silent, and in doing so, I had finally learned to hear my own heart. And that, more than any scientific breakthrough, was my greatest triumph.